This episode of The Unstarving Musician is powered by Bandzoogle. They have been helping musicians around the world create professional artist websites. Musicians like you and me. I have an artist website, and I've had it for a long time at robonzo.com. It was originally built on WordPress by me. I happen to be a WordPress designer, and I still use WordPress for a number of other sites that I've designed. But just so happens that I had combined my artist website with unstarvingmusician.com, and then came a day when I needed to undo that. It took a little while, but Bandzoogle happened to contact me when I was working on that. They encouraged me to check out the platform and share it with you guys. So I checked it out. My artist website, robonzo.com, is now on the Bandzoogle platform. They told me they have an easy-to-use system, and they weren't kidding. They also have tons of mobile-friendly templates, enough so that I haven't even checked them all out yet. It was built for musicians by musicians. That's a big deal. They have tools to help you sell merch and tickets to your shows commission-free. And if you don't have one of those email service providers, they have tools to help you grow your email list and integrate your socials. They offer support from a musician-friendly team 7 days a week. Hello, that's huge. And plans start at just $8.29 a month. But you, my friend, can go to bandzoogle.com to start a 30-day free trial and use the promo code ROBONZO to get 15% off your first year. All right, so go to bandzoogle.com, check it out, use the promo code ROBONZO, that's ROBONZO. Let's do the show. This is the Unstarving Musicians Podcast. I'm your host, Robonzo. This podcast features conversations with me and indie music artists. Conversations intended to help other indie musicians be better at marketing, business, the creative process, and all the other things that empower us to do more of what we love. Make music. Welcome to another episode. This is a special one. I am pushing it out a little faster than usual. I actually recorded this interview on Friday, March 20. I believe you're actually going to be able to listen to it today, which is much faster than I normally put them out. And the reason I'm doing that is because we are in the midst of the novel coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, and the topic of discussion is what musicians can do to keep the economic engine of their lives going during this crazy time. My guest is Dave Kuhl, Director of Artist and Industry Outreach at Bandzoogle. I originally reached out to Bandzoogle to invite the founder, Chris Vinson, to come on to the show, and my idea was to have him on to introduce you all to Bandzoogle and tell their story and his story. The reason I wanted to do this is because I am a proud affiliate of Bandzoogle. But a couple of weeks later, we find ourselves in this pandemic situation, and Dave offered to come onto the podcast to talk about the topic of what musicians can and should be doing amidst this dilemma, this crisis we're in. And in my opinion, something that will prep us for the future, because we do need to think about contingencies for whatever situation life may throw at us. And I think this conversation we have here is helpful for that. So we talk about, among other things, how Dave got involved in Bandzoogle and how he got to thinking of ways to help musicians, why he got to thinking about it, and he explains that Bandzoogle customers, musicians, were reaching out for ideas. He started to respond by email and started working on a couple of long emails and decided it would be a better way to serve customers of Bandzoogle and other musicians by creating a blog post on the topic. So we talk about that. The link for that blog post is in the show notes, which, by the way, will come out a little later than usual because I'm pushing this out so fast, sort of deviating from my normal production process. But anyway, Dave goes on to say that it's okay for musicians to ask for support during this time. We talk about the pay-what-you-want model. If you don't know what I'm talking about there, you'll understand after you hear the conversation. We talk about pre-order campaigns, house concerts and how they are affected, but what we can still do in that realm. We talk about side hustles and teaching online, and also how this is affecting the Bandzoogle team, Dave and his coworkers. I hope that you and yours are well, keeping it together. And this is definitely a tough time for everyone. I trust we will support one another and know that we'll get through it. But let's get on to the conversation with me and Dave Cool. I hope you enjoy it. I know enough about you that I don't have any pre-recording questions. So you ready?
I'm ready.
Well, thank you again for spending time with me on your Friday during this crazy last couple of weeks. To give people perspective who might listen to this in the future, today's March 20th, Friday, March 20th, 2020. And you were kind enough to make time for me short notice so we could talk about what musicians can do amidst these novel times with the novel coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic amongst us, and a lot of gigs being canceled and all kinds of other things impacting independent musicians. And as fate would have it, Dave, you just wrote a cool blog post about that. But why don't, before we dive right into that, I would love for you to share the story of how you got involved in Bandzoogle.
How did I get involved in Bandzoogle? It was kind of by accident. I live up in Montreal, Canada, and the company was based here for about 14 years. The founder is from here. His rock band, Chris Vincent's rock band called Rubberman, were the big rock band in the music scene in Montreal when I was coming up through the rock scene. So he's a few years older than me. And so I always knew Rubberman. And then he started Bandzoogle. I found out about them, and I started using Bandzoogle for websites for my record label and for a movie documentary film I made about the music industry called What is Indie, and was always a huge fan of the company. And I was working as a booking agent, a program director at a couple of venues in Montreal, and quit that and was taking some time off, and I wanted to do some writing, and I released a free ebook and was doing a lot of blogging for musicians, just giving advice on my experiences in the booking world. And the CEO at the time, David Dufresne, heard about me through a mutual friend at Sonic Bids at the time. And because David was talking about how he saw a lot of mistakes happening at music conferences, and he wanted to write a blog post on like best practices for musicians at music conferences. And the person from Sonic Bids who knew me was like, hey, there's a guy who lives in your hometown that just released a free ebook about music conferences for musicians. You might want to talk to him. Mm-hmm. And so, he reached out and we had a coffee, and he basically offered me a job on the spot, to which I said no. Because I was really burned out and wasn't looking for work. And I said, look, I love the company. I've always been a fan. I'm going to give you guys whatever content I write. No problem. But David at the time was very persistent. And the company, Bandzoogle, is remote. So we have about 25 staff, a little bit all over the world. And back then it probably would have been closer to maybe 12 to 15 staff. This is going back 9 years. But long story short, I was doing a few hours a week doing some blog work for Bandzoogle, and the CEO at the time, David Dufresne, invited me for dinner at their annual meetup. So once a year, the company flies in all the staff and their families to one location to hang out for a week because we don't get to see each other in person. And I went to the group dinner one of the nights, and it felt like family. And when I went up to him after the dinner, I was like, all right, you got me. I'm in. And 9 years later, still at the company and loving it. And, obviously right now it's interesting times. And for Bandzoogle as a company, we are fortunate in many ways, but one of the ways we're fortunate is that we've always been remote. And so we're completely used to working remotely. And so one thing we don't have to adjust to during this pandemic is running the company from home offices, because that's always what we've been doing. Yeah.
That is fortunate. I was speaking with a project manager for a web thing I'm working on, and asked. This was just yesterday, and he was saying that he's having to educate a lot of his clients on working from home. He's like us, works from home pretty regularly, and has for a while. So I hadn't really thought about that, but his hope is when this is all done that more people will and companies will support working from home. He's in the Silicon Valley, which is a got a huge commuting problem, like other places around the U.S. and I'm sure Canada as well. So, just out of curiosity, so Chris Vincent, so you joined about 9 years ago. How long had the company been going prior to that?
Doing the math here, 7 years, probably 6 or 7 years.
Okay, wow. And so, what is Chris Vincent doing these days?
So he's stepped back from the day to day of the company. We have a new CEO, Stacey Bedford, who, she was the very first tech support person hired at the company.
I love it.
And everything she touches at the company, every department she's been part of, she whips it into shape, makes it more efficient, more productive. And, she became the support manager, then director of operations, then chief operating officer. And then Chris decided that it was time to step back and let Stacey take the reins of the company. And we've had, prior to the current climate, we've had some of the biggest, the last couple of years have been some of the biggest in the company's history in terms of not only growth as a company, but just the amount of features that the company's releasing and the productivity and the types of features we're releasing. It's been a really exciting time at the company. And as for Chris, he's a full-on foodie in the true sense of the word, and a huge wine snob. And I always love to travel with him to conferences. But he's opened up a small restaurant up here in Quebec, Canada, and partnered with a really great chef. And he's throwing himself into the restaurant world right now and loving it. So
I'll be darned.
So that's what he's at. He's keeping real busy, but
wow.
he's still up. He's still up to date on what's going on with Bandzoogle, but he's just not as actively involved on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. Now I want to talk to him more because I too have thrown myself in the world of the restaurant business.
Nice.
But yeah, maybe someday. Based on what you just told me about Stacey, if she's amenable, I would love to speak with her someday as well. I have a small business podcast, and she might fit even better on there. But I certainly have the luxury of kind of cross promoting those things. And then you mentioned you come from a rock music background. Can you talk a little bit about yourself as a musician?
Sure. Yeah. Like a lot of people that work in the music industry, I had a kind of a brief, fleeting career as a musician, and
Sure.
I grew up in a household where every Saturday night, not so much these days, but for almost 40 years, every Saturday night in my parents' basement, there was a blues jam. And musicians from all over Montreal would come to this blues jam. It's very collaborative, very open. And when I was 5 years old, so this has been going on before I was born, but when I was 5 years old, the drummer for the band quit. And so my dad trained me like a monkey to keep a beat. And I became the drummer for the band. And that went on until I was a teenager, and then it wasn't cool to be playing in my dad's band. And so I, joined a couple of punk rock bands and some rock bands and did my own thing and signed some very small local record deals, did some, small tours, regional tours, that kind of thing. And, public service announcement for anyone listening who's a young musician, always wear earplugs because I played very loud music and I played drums very loudly. And I joke with people that my right ear is just there for symmetry at this point. It doesn't do a lot functionally. I lost my hearing. I have severe tinnitus.
Oh man, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it's definitely sucks, but it's something I've had since I was a teenager, and I'm kind of just used to it. I think it could definitely be worse, and a lot of musicians suffer from tinnitus and hearing loss and things like that. And I was just, I was young, and doctors were telling me, audiologists were telling me you need to wear earplugs, and I was like, nah, I don't need those, and turns out they may have been right. So I left music behind in my early 20s because I wanted to keep my left ear functional. So I dove into starting a record label and doing other things in the industry. Yeah.
I've been encouraging my bandmates to use in-ear monitors, which used properly can serve a similar
absolutely
a great very, very similar and even enhanced protection. But yes, that is great advice. All right, so thanks for that. So let's dive into the topic of interest. We are in some interesting times, and it's fascinating how quickly it's all converged on us from week to week, day to day. And I still perform live on a regular basis and experience the gig cancellations. And as fate would have it for me, I had a string of gigs, and I was coming up to the last one in the string, and nothing booked beyond that. It's a brand new band, and we were obviously looking forward to doing some more things, but I was looking forward to a little break. But one was imposed upon me by a cancellation. Actually, it was a double booking, but it turned out the venue decided, this was 1 week ago today, the venue decided to go ahead with the band that they thought they were supposed to have there that night. And they got shut down by the local police for having a gathering of, I guess over 15 or 50 people, whatever the number was last week, and people dancing. So they shut them down. So while all of that may have been a little exciting, I don't mind that I missed it.
Yeah, but fair enough.
Yeah, and then I quickly realized that everyone's. I'm getting emails from friends whose lists I'm on, and other friends who are in some capacity a little like me, in that they're sharing information, producing content, that are talking about it. And here you and I are about to talk about it because you've certainly heard so much about it. And just a couple of days ago, before we started recording, I mentioned a gal that works with me who's based in Canada, and she just out of the blue said, "Hey, what do you think about doing an episode on what musicians can do to earn money online, since it's kind of tough for them right now?" Like, great idea. And I think the same day or the next day, you and I spoke by email. So here we are. And you recently put together this blog post, how musicians can ask fans for support during the coronavirus pandemic. So tell me your thoughts on the situation and how musicians can get by, and I assume also position themselves for the future.
Yeah, exactly. So, the blog post it kind of came out naturally because the last weekend, it would have been, a couple of Bandzoogle members reached out to me by email and were just like, "Hey, all of our gigs are canceled. What can we do with our website to, try to generate some revenue and try to reach our fans?" And so I started typing out these long responses to these two members, and then realized, well, I should just turn this might be useful information for,
Heck yeah.
obviously other musicians, So I spent all day Monday working on this post and just trying to think of the different ways, not only through Bandzoogle, but through other online platforms as well, where musicians could leverage the online connection with their fans to keep in touch with them, and also ask for their help. And I think the first thing that I have been pointing out to musicians is that it's okay to ask for support. A lot of fans see, because, a lot of musicians hear the advice from music marketers and things like that, like you're showing your best self normally on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, whatever. It seems very exciting. You're in studio, you're touring, you're playing live shows, there's fans, and, it seems like you're living this rock star lifestyle. But even some of the best known artists that are touring, I mean, this is a crisis. Like, there's a very, very, very tiny percentage of musicians that are wealthy enough to withstand something like this without any, huge impact. A lot of most musicians depend on that live income to pay their bills. And so this is potentially, depending on how long it goes for, a real crisis for a lot of musicians. So I think the first point to make is that it's totally fine to let people know your circumstances. Like, hey, this is the reality of my situation, and I can't reach you in a live venue and sell tickets and sell merch directly. So let's try to connect online. And here are some of the ways that we can do that. And, there's a bunch of ways. And, it starts with, buying music, obviously as a baseline one. We do live in a streaming world for sure, and streaming music is fine. One of the last points I made is that it's also important to remember that everyone's being impacted. Like, most industries are being impacted by this, and people's livelihoods are being impacted by this. So some of your fans may not be able to financially support you right now either, because they might be losing their jobs too. And so there are other ways where fans can support, where that's just streaming your music, watching your videos on YouTube, sharing your music with their friends, things like sending, Kevin Bruner from CD Baby had this great idea. It was just like sending emails of support to your favorite artists, just like, hey, hang in there, we're with you. Like, just any way to support an artist at this point, I think, is totally, totally fine. If people do have the means to support financially, then there's buying music, buying music directly, through Bandzoogel's platform. Our members can sell their music, their merch, totally commission free. So we don't even touch the transaction. So it all goes directly from the fan to the artist, minus whatever PayPal or Stripe fees there are.
Mm-hmm.
Bandcamp is free to use, and they take 15% of sales. Today, as we're speaking on March 20th, they're actually doing a 1-day sort of fundraiser where they're waiving that 15% fee for their artists to sell music. CD Baby has a retail store where they take 9% of sales, which artists can use for the next couple of weeks, but they're actually retiring that retail store at the end of March. So,
oh, really?
For CD Baby members that are listening to this, you can still keep using that store to sell direct to your fans till March 31st, and then they're going to be retiring that. And we have a new partnership with them. We actually just migrated all their Host Baby members to the Bandzoogel platform, and we have a lot of CD Baby members now using Bandzoogel. So we're going to send out a reminder to all of them that, hey, after the retail store shuts down at CD Baby, you can, of course, keep selling your music merch directly through your own website on Bandzoogel, and we don't take any cut of those sales. So buying music is kind of a baseline thing. One tactic that we always encourage, and especially now, is using the pay what you want model. And on our music players and Bandcamp, you can do this as well, where you can set a minimum, but you can make it pay what you want. So the fan could, instead of setting the price on a track at $1 and then, an album is $10, which is fine. But especially during a time like this, if someone can afford to give more, why not give them the opportunity to give more? So you might be selling a track for $1, but if you make it pay what you want, your fan might give you $10 for the track or $50 for the album.
Sure.
But if you set the price, you're not giving them the opportunity to do that. So you can set the minimum to be $1 or $10 if you want that to be the absolute baseline. But giving them that option can be, can at least give them the opportunity to give you more.
Yeah, if I may interject on that approach, pay what you want. And I hope we can talk about this what I'm about to mention, which is house concerts. But with house concerts, there are a couple of approaches one can take with in terms of the donations from fans who attend the shows. One of them is a set, maybe like a $20 recommended donation, or pay what you feel. The other one is, pay what you feel the performance was worth. And I did the latter this is at the advice of Shannon Curtis,
Yep.
an artist that I'm sure you're familiar with. Yep. And
I had dinner with her one night in LA years ago. Yes.
Nice.
Obviously super experienced.
Yeah,
successful with house concerts. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, amazing. And I'll put a link to her website and her book on house concerts in the show notes. I highly recommend you check it out. But we did quite well doing the pay what you want model, and it was the first house concert I had ever done. First one I'd ever pitched. I kind of co-organized because I had to get a musician to come from the States, or I didn't have to, this was my preference, but I knew an original artist who'd been on the podcast, and he came here with his partner and manager, and we did that and some other gigs, and it worked really well. So back to your point of the pay what you want model, I love that, and also maybe setting I hadn't really thought of it, but setting a minimum on that.
Yeah,
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So we would sometimes say, like, put the minimum as, 0, just so you can capture their email address. But, in the current climate, I think it's totally fine to set a minimum of, $1 or 50 cents or something, some baseline number, and then let fans give a little bit more than that. There's also buying merch. And so, I included that in this blog post because if you've got T-shirts and posters or hats or guitar picks or whatever, you can sell those, but it depends on the individual and where you live. But obviously with people practicing social distancing and some people may not want to go out. You may not want to go out to the post office to ship all these things. So if you are going to be selling merch, probably just include a note that there might be shipping delays and that you can do a post office run when things kind of settle down, because some people may not be comfortable.
Yeah, right.
Getting things mailed to them right now. There's also pre-orders. So if you're an artist who's thinking about releasing an album this year, might be worth taking the time to plan out just some initial, pre-order campaign, put together some quick artwork for it and just set up the pre-order. Again, you can do that on Bandcamp. You can do that through Bandzoogle. And just be honest with your fans about the timeline. Like, if you're doing this a little bit earlier than you would have, explain why, but at least that can hopefully drive some income for you now while things are, in a little bit of a chaotic mode in terms of being able to perform live and go out touring. There's the same thing with crowdfunding. So, planning out a crowdfunding campaign maybe a little earlier than you may have wanted, or, planning it out at all. If you, something definitely worth considering. Obviously there's platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, which are solid crowdfunding platforms. They take 5% plus processing fees. There's some different rules between Kickstarter and Indiegogo. I think Kickstarter, you have to raise the full amount to get the money. Indiegogo, it's a little bit more flexible. Bandzoogle launched the ability to crowdfund through your website directly this past year or last year. And so you can actually do all of that through your website. And again, it's all commission free. So we don't get involved in the financial transactions. So obviously, and we launched that in response to what had happened with Pledge Music going bankrupt and artists being out thousands and tens of thousands of dollars because the money was held by Pledge Music, which was their policy. But then, they went bankrupt and artists never saw that money, which was pretty tragic. So if you're doing it through Bandzoogle, we don't hold the funds because we don't even touch the funds. It goes straight from fan to the artist.
Let me pause you for just a second. I
Yep.
I didn't even know about that one. And for those listening, maybe for the first time, if you listen to the intro, you'll know, or you might guess that I'm a proud affiliate of Bandzoogle's. Dave reached out to me once upon a time a while back, and we talked, and I said, yeah, I'd like to be an affiliate. And the other thing was a commitment to try the platform. It took me a little while, but I finally got my website up on there and been very pleased with it. I'm a long-time WordPress designer and user, and I didn't even know about this one. And I was telling probably on a revised what I want to say, not announcement, mention of Bandzoogle on the podcast. I was saying that there are a lot of great features, some of which I haven't even explored. Oh, it's the templates, but case in point, there's a lot of stuff that I haven't even explored. I know of some artists, not all, but some that are fancy, doing things without the middleman, so to speak, and this is a great in-between, if you will. It's a great way to do it. Actually, it's not even an in between, because if you have a website, you're going to pay something, no matter what platform you're using. If you're doing it properly, you're going to pay something, and so to just be able to pay a monthly fee to a great content management system, feature-rich system like Bandzoogle is pretty cool. And now you have this, among other things, that are commission free. How long has the crowdfunding feature been out? What's the response been?
We launched it, I guess it would have been last June. And we had been partners with Pledge Music for many years and saw no reason to get into the crowdfunding space because we had even an integration with them. And their founder, one of their co-founders, had been a longtime Bandzoogle member, Benji Rogers. And so once we started to get a sense that things were not going well there, we pulled the integration. We started to, warn our members like, hey, maybe it's time to stop using Pledge Music. And then we started to get word from our members that they weren't being paid out by Pledge Music and things like that. So we saw what was happening. And so we put together our features in a way that made it easier to set up a crowdfunding campaign directly through your website. And the response was great. We're adding more functionality to that this year because, we're a website platform. So there were certain elements and certain features that weren't part of the initial launch, but we're going to be adding those later. And one of them is going to be like a merch fulfillment partner to make it easier to fulfill the crowdfunding orders. Because right now in Bandschool, if you sell merch, you get the notification. You keep all the money, but you also have to pack it and ship it and do the whole thing. So for crowdfunding, some bands and artists would prefer to have a third party handle all that. So we're looking into options for that. So the response was great. There's no doubt a bunch of members that have run successful campaigns that we don't know about, but a couple of artists approached me at the Folk Alliance conference in New Orleans this past January and had raised between $20,000 and $30,000 on their crowdfunding campaigns through their website, all commission free. And that makes a big difference. Someone taking 5% or 10%, whatever the case might be. The money goes straight in their pocket. So the response was really great. We actually launched built-in subscriptions immediately after crowdfunding. So subscriptions came out in August, I believe. So fan subscriptions, you can launch kind of like an online fan club. So it's like a gated section of your website. You can have different tiers, different pricing for each tier, different exclusive content available to all those fans. It's kind of like having, your own online fan club. And, in the blog post that I wrote, of course, we mentioned Patreon, which, is a different model completely, and they do take a percentage of sales. But, Patreon's become kind of synonymous with patronage and that kind of model. But we are seeing a lot of Bandzoogle members using the built-in subscriptions because it's part of their website. There's no extra cost for it. It's available on all plans. And you can start this online fan club and give your fans exclusive content in exchange for a monthly recurring fee. We're seeing artists raising between hundreds of dollars a month to thousands of dollars a month through these online fan clubs, which gives them a little bit more, consistent, reliable income directly through their website.
Well, that's really cool. I should underscore that one too, having put together a membership site for another company in the past and on a WordPress website, and there are these integration things that are involved and licensing that's involved, and it's a great feature-rich product. But I look forward to sort of looking at the features that the Bandzoogle membership thing has. But I would say that I'm sure comparatively to putting attaching one to like a standard WordPress build is it's not easy for everyone. So I'm confident, or I'm guessing that it's fairly easy on the Bandzoogle platform to do that. So that's a pretty big deal, and I'm glad to hear that you guys are having these stories of people raising hundreds or thousands of dollars a month. That makes an impact.
It definitely does, and we're going to be part of my job at Bandzoogle is overseeing the communications, the blog, and email marketing and social media and things like that. And obviously, given the current crisis and pandemic, we had months of blog content scheduled, and to be honest, it would be really tone deaf to keep putting that stuff up right now because it's just not relevant to the current situation. So we've paused all of that, and so musicians are going to see through our blog and through our social media, we're completely focusing all of that on how musicians can weather this storm. And so we're working on some case studies for crowdfunding subscriptions. We're working on we're going to organize a few webinars. One is going to be next week with Rick Barker, who's going to go through live streaming for musicians. It's not something that I'm personally an expert at, but it's something that he's been an expert on for many years. And so we're going to be offering these free webinars from some of our partners to let our members and other musicians as well. They're going to be free to attend, how they can use live streaming and leverage live streaming to connect with their fans and generate some revenue. Again, doing some case studies. We have some writers who are going to be submitting content on like how to start teaching music online. So if you're a musician and you want to, give voice lessons or teach your instrument online to your fans, like how to get started doing that. So all of these things we're going to be getting up on our blog as soon as possible to give our members and musicians at large just as many options and as much advice as possible to get through this.
And that's a great strategy. I need to contact Rick Barker. He and I via email had committed to schedule one of these, and we just haven't made it happen yet. And I know he's a busy guy, so I need to ping him again, and maybe I'll hit him up on this. I'm very fascinated by live streaming. I mean, it's kind of been around forever, but there is a platform that you are probably as intrigued as I am about, Twitch.
Yes.
And I'm sure he's familiar with that one and some others, so that would be a lot of fun to explore. I started looking at Twitch for musicians this morning, and someone else mentioned it to me. It's probably been a couple of months now, and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I need to look at that. And I started looking at it this morning, and I was laughing at how unfamiliar. Well, first I just went to Twitch, and I was laughing. Yeah. I'm like, uh-oh, the old guy's in here trying to figure out what the hell this is all about. And I even went to the part for musicians, and I'm like, okay, I guess I need to watch this, this gal play some stuff in her home studio, and because she's, I guess, talks about how it works. And it looks very fascinating. I'm glad that you mentioned it. And am I right that it's new to you as well?
Oh, yeah, I had the exact same experience as you the other day. Just like old guy trying to figure out this new fangled technology. I had no idea what I was doing. So it's interesting you mentioned that. So Rick Barker is going to be doing a webinar focused on Facebook Live and Instagram Live, and then we're going to get Karen Allen from Twitch for Musicians to do a webinar the following week all about Twitch and how musicians can use that platform to connect with their audience, because I have zero idea how that works. So she's definitely expert on that, and we're thrilled that we're going to be able to have her teach that to our members.
I love that. What do you think about so maybe two things. I'll back up for a second to house concerts, but do you think there's a potential new niche for doing a live streaming type of house concert, as opposed to, I don't know if it makes any sense, but as opposed to, maybe it doesn't at all, because with the normal live broadcast on, say, Twitch or whatever platform, you're just kind of making it available to everyone. But maybe there is a place, and you can tell me what you think, but maybe there is a place to do these more exclusive events where you're doing something for a house show for a specific group of people who are maybe, you can share the experience, the back and forth, and kind of see them and doing what you might normally do in person virtually. Do you think there's a possibility there?
Definitely. And I think that Zoom is a platform where that is possible, where you can invite people to also interact live and have a lot of participants. It's interesting. I was just before we started talking this morning, I was outlining a blog post, like a guide to live streaming for musicians. And I was looking at all the different options. I'm hiring a writer to do a lot of that research this weekend, because there's so many different platforms. But in my initial research, it looks like with Zoom you could do that. With Stage It, you can sell tickets, and so in terms of monetization and making it more of like a concert rather than just like an impromptu live stream where everyone can watch it for free, like Stage It, you can sell tickets. They actually upped the artist payouts to 80% in light of the pandemic, which is a great gesture. Live streaming, a lot of members ask bands, go like, how come you guys don't do live streaming video? And like, it's so expensive. There's a reason why, the companies that are doing it where it's free is like Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. These behemoth companies can afford to do that, and other platforms are paid platforms like Zoom, Crowdcast. Vimeo charges $75 a month to do live streaming. So it's a pretty large cost for the platforms offering it. But Stage It is, like I said, is upping their artist payouts to 80% during this time, which is great. So a lot of artists are hopping on that. Crowdcast is a more affordable option where it's $30 a month, and you can embed that live stream. Getting back to the subscriptions feature, if you are running a memberships or online fan club, you can put the the live stream behind a paywall. So you have to be a subscriber, and you can do exclusive shows for your subscribers. So you can use Crowdcast to do that. Or other option is you can sell tickets to the show. Again, if you're a Band Ziegler member, we have the built-in ticketing feature where you can sell tickets commission free, and then everyone who buys a ticket, you can send them a link to a password-protected page where they can log in and see the live stream of the show. So I don't know if I answered your question in terms of like the house concert necessarily. I believe with Zoom, it's possible to get a lot more people on screen and interacting, and there may be other I'm not sure if it's possible with StageIt or Crowdcast, but I will hopefully know more next week.
Well, yeah, and no, you did answer the question quite well. You sort of opening my eyes to and hopefully those of others to the possibilities and different ways that different platforms, different ways we can look at this, and very cool, of course, that. Is it weird when people say cool since your last name's cool?
It's funny. Sometimes I notice people say it more. Sometimes I'm like not consciously, just when I'm around. But no, it's if I could only get a royalty for every time.
No kidding. But no, it was great. What do you think about musicians coming a little more being a little more forward with forthcoming with their side hustles? For instance, so. Let's say I was more of a full-time musician who happened to do websites as opposed to a more full-time web designer who happens to play music because I love it so much. But there are a lot of hidden talents among musicians. Some of them are very forthcoming with things like their artwork, like on various mediums like painting or whatever. But what do you think about musicians being a little more forthcoming with whatever other talents that they have that they may not be talking about because when they're talking to their audience and marketing their brand, their musician or band brand, they just leave that out?
That's an excellent question. That's a really good question, and I'm definitely on the side, and it'll be. I think it's a question that, depending on who you're asking, depends on the answer. For myself personally, I don't see any shame in letting people know that, hey, I'm a musician, but I also have these skills, or I can also do this for you, freelance or whatever the case, graphic design, whatever it is, to get through a crisis like this. Especially, I'm okay with it on a day-to-day basis, let alone during this time. But other people might say, well, you want to put your brand forward of a successful musician, and you don't want to let fans know that, to make ends meet, you do other things. I kind of get that, but I also don't think there's any shame in letting people know that you do a lot of things to make ends meet. And, at this point, you're not able to do music as much as you normally would have. So focusing on some of those other skill sets that you have to make a bit of money to get through a difficult period, I think it's completely fine, and there's absolutely no shame in it whatsoever. But that's my personal opinion. Yeah,
and I guess if we're honest, the audience that you and I speak to mostly are those who benefit from letting our people into our weird little world, which might consist of things. Hey, did you know that I have this other talent besides music? And frankly, even if we look at those that are very focused on a cultivated brand, you can go all the way to the top and look at the mega stars, and they are clearly making money on things besides their music. And these are things that they go into with a lot of love and gusto. It may be a very common one is, say, fashion.
Yep.
And I don't see why. Especially if it's something that you enjoy doing, why you wouldn't come forth with it? Especially now, it's sort of it's kind of eye opening, isn't it? These times that maybe I should look at this a little differently.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then a topic that I know we're all passionate about is teaching. As fate would have it, if I can use that expression for a second or third or fourth time on this in this conversation. I released an episode today on the Unstarving Musician with an artist / educator named Ariana Kapp, who is a bass instructor of not only how to play, but technique and a creative way to learn theory. And she is sort of crossed over the lesson provider who's doing things, some stuff on Skype one-to-one, to building a legitimate, she has a legitimate business online, but she's really building out a legitimate part as an online educator. She's had a lot of success with a book she published a while back. So I guess, I talk to a lot of musicians who are part-time, or they may be full-time independent original music artists. They might be part-time cover band artists, but many of them teach, and many of them just one-to-one, and that's definitely going to be that. If that's a source of your income, doing in-person lessons, that hurts. Right now, this time hurts. So what are your thoughts on, especially for those who haven't done it before, what are your thoughts, or what advice might you share on getting started?
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's definitely something, again, outside of the current climate, that I've always encouraged musicians to explore as an income stream. Is you're passionate about playing music, you're good at your instrument or singing or both, why not share that with your fans? And teach it for, to make a little bit of additional income. So especially during this climate. And so for musicians who haven't yet explored that and who want to get started, a couple things. One, a friend to both of us, Bree Noble from Women of Substance, is going to be publishing a blog post on our blog next week about how to get started, teaching music online. And she sent out an email this week talking about the Reach Summit, which is organized by Teachable. Mm-hmm. And it's happening March 24th through 26th. It's free to register, and it's all about freelancers and how to teach online. So they'll, it looks like for anyone who's remotely interested in teaching online, this looks like a great summit to attend, and it's free. So that information, you can just Google it, or it's on Bandzoogel's blog right now in that blog post on how musicians can ask fans for support. There's a whole section on giving online music lessons, so you can find out the registration info there. So I'm again, it's not something I'm an expert at personally, but I know Bree was passionate about it, and so she's going to be publishing something hopefully next week with a little bit more step-by-step on how musicians can get started and what tools they can use to do that. Yeah,
Bree Noble's content is always very timely. I am a subscriber to her list, and I can just look at the subject line and I'm like, that's good. The timing is perfect. Obviously now's the time to talk about these things. And to my email list this week, I sent out a message that kind of started with, I'm already growing tired of email subject lines having to do with the coronavirus, COVID-19. So I'll tell you, instead of telling you what you should do, I'll tell you what's happening in my world. Yeah. And see if that's refreshing for you as it is for, as it does feel for me. But I will put that in the show notes, and I guess I would say my 2 cents. I've been kind of passionate about this idea. I'm not even a teacher either. I've never considered myself a teacher when it comes to my primary instrument, which is drums. Who knows? Maybe someday. But I know a lot of teachers, and I know a lot of them who have never done anything online. So it's probably been more than a year now. I started encouraging musicians to do just that. One of the easiest things we can do is sign up for a Skype account or a Zoom account. They both have free products that work for this, and to not be afraid of just getting started. And even, I've heard musicians say that they used to give a lot of lessons, but since YouTube came about, that's kind of gone. But I'm actually quite amazed and impressed at the number of people out there who desperately want to have one-on-one lessons, coaching, advice, particularly with someone they like, know, and trust. And as more than one guest of this podcast has said, social media certainly comes with its annoyances, but one of the wonderful things it does is it gives us an opportunity to connect with people that we would never have otherwise been able to all over the world. So we could be giving lessons to people abroad from wherever we are and making new friendships that way. So I would say that, just get started. Your phone's probably all you need to, as far as a camera goes, and, upgrade as you go.
Absolutely. I think that's wonderful advice. Couldn't have said it better.
So how is all this affecting your world and the world of your coworkers at Bandzoogle? I know it is. How's it affecting you, and what are you guys doing to adapt?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, so we are used to working remotely and working from home because that's just always the way it's been at Bandzoogle. But obviously, all of our staff who have families, the kids are home, there's no school, there's no daycare. And so it's definitely a challenge. And we actually have a staff member in Italy, which has been hit really hard. And so it's definitely scary. And there's definitely a lot more. We use a couple of different tools to communicate, but, Slack is our primary one. And there's just a lot more conversation going on, like how's everyone doing and talking about their experiences. And we started these weekly kind of social club meetings where everyone kind of gets together and just talks about stuff not related to work, just to, talk to each other and, lean on each other for support a little bit because we're all having similar experiences here to varying degrees. And it's definitely, it's been I would say it's been a challenging week just for morale. Not only because of our personal situations, but seeing how this is impacting musicians and their livelihoods. And so all the conversations right now at the company are centered around how can we help? How can we be of service? So like I mentioned before, all the blog content and social media, and organizing webinars, all going to be focused on how to help musicians. We're launching a few new features that are going to help during this time in small ways. And one of them, is out now and we're going to announce it next week, but we're just going to make it easier for musicians who had gigs booked and sold tickets through their website to be able to offer refunds to everyone that bought tickets, just to make it easier through the control panel, things like that. Working on a different tip jar feature to make it a little bit easier to just, send quick, tips or donations through the website. So we're the conversation is very much focused on this, but yeah, like you mentioned, it's, there's the human element to it, and we're all a little bit worried. It's unsettling and it's uncertain, and we're all kind of, taking it day by day.
Yeah. Well, to everyone and your team especially, keep your chins up. Don't watch too much news on TV, and take a moment to realize that we have an opportunity to do a lot of things that we don't normally have time to do. Be it creative, or just getting together with one another, as you guys at your company have chosen to do on a more social and supportive manner. And we'll get through this. It's going to be hard for sure, but I think we have a lot of interesting opportunities ahead of us. One of which, for those of you who are listening that are independent musicians who have not yet put your website together, it really does matter. I've talked about it on this podcast and to my subscribers many times. Bandzoogle, like I said, I moved my artist website there. It's super easy. It's not the only option, so this isn't just a pitch for Bandzoogle, although I highly encourage you to look at it. But if you have a little idle time, one of the things you can do to get all of this stuff in motion is to put your website together, because no matter what third-party platforms you adopt for streaming shows or building a patronage type of model or doing live streaming, there's really only one property that you own, and that is the domain and the website that is hinged to it. And that is the best place for you to build the most important thing in your journey, which is your community via an email list. Those are the only two things that you own. It's the only real estate online that you truly own. The sad truth of the third-party platforms, as wonderful as they all are, is that they change. They go away sometimes. Sometimes changes can devastate a small business person or a small artist. So I encourage you, if you don't already have a really nice artist website or band website, to start exploring Bandzoogle and other platforms to see which one is best for you, and just dig in. And if you need help, I know that Dave and his team at Bandzoogle are there. It's as I always say, a musician-friendly support team. You can even contact me, and I can answer questions that you have about Bandzoogle or WordPress or whatever. Dave, is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to leave listeners with?
No, I think we covered a lot. It was a great conversation, and I appreciate you reaching out. And it was nice to talk to someone about this, to be honest, amidst all of this chaos. So I hope everyone listening got something from it. And I would just encourage everyone, all the musicians out there, to keep an eye on the Bandzoogle blog. We're going to be sharing a lot of resources, and again, announcing some free webinars and training sessions and things like that, and just hope to be of some help during this time. Yeah, and there's some great content there on the Bandzoogle blog. And one of the other things you can do is click on Dave Cool in text and learn about Dave and his history with the company and outside of that. And hey, man, thanks again for spending time with me. I know we'll chat again sometime soon, especially since I'm going to put this one out into the wild quicker than normal. I think it makes sense. So, yeah, I appreciate you. Appreciate you too. Thanks. All Great to talk to you. Likewise. Hey, thanks again for listening. If you are loving the podcast, please visit unstarvingmusician.com/crowd sponsor to learn about the various ways that you can offer your support. And again, if you're a listener, I consider you a supporter, especially if you shared it with a friend. Thank you. Look for show notes and links to most everything mentioned in this episode at unstarvingmusician.com/podcast. Thanks so much for listening. With a whole lot of gratitude, peace, love, and more cowbell. Hey kids, one last thing. This is a public service announcement of sorts for Alexa users. Apple Podcasts is now available on Alexa-enabled Amazon devices in the United States. So what does this mean? Why am I telling you? Well, because now you can say things like, Alexa, play The Unstarving Musician on Apple Podcasts, or Alexa, play The Unstarving Musician from yesterday on Apple Podcast. A lot of other cool things like that. So I hope you'll check that out. And if you want to learn more, you can look for a link on messing with your Alexa and podcasts in the show notes. Ciao.